Top Med Talk.
Welcome back, Top Med Talk listeners. We are here at Anesthesiology 2023, the annual meeting of the American Society of Anesthesiologists here in San Francisco. Top Med Talk has a home base in the exhibit hall. It is absolutely beautiful. There is a buzz in the air. I'm Desiree Chappell. I'm your host, and I'm joined by my co-host and the new co-editor-in-chief of Top Med Talk, Mike Grocott. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Desiree. Good morning.
Yes.
Looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've had lots of amazing conversations on Top Med Talk over the last day and a half. If you've missed any of those, no worries. You can go to topmedtalk.com and see all of those wonderful conversations. Listen to those. Again, topmedtalk.com. We did want to do a little shout out before we get going here. Thank you so much to the American Society of Anesthesiologists for supporting us to be here and the booth this year. We could not do it without you. And also the generous support of our sponsors, GE Healthcare, Medtronic, and Edwards Life Sciences. Thank you all so much for keeping Top Med Talk free and open access to the world. So now a lot of the conversations we've had over the last day and a half have been centered around technology, new pharmaceutical drugs, things like that are coming out, emerging technologies, and specifically about artificial intelligence. And really some of the topics that we've been discussing and really digging into this, we feel like things are advancing pretty quickly, and where in anesthesiology does all of it fit into our practice every day? And I think this conversation is going to continue that. And so our guest today, we're so excited to have Dr. Ronald Pearl. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. So Ron, why don't you give us a little bit about your background?
So I'm trained as an anesthesiologist, also as an intensivist, and trained in both anesthesiology and internal medicine. I practice cardiac anesthesia and intensive care. I've been interested in advances in technology and how it will impact the practice of anesthesia and the practice of medicine for many years. I have been the chair of the Committee on Innovation for the past several years, and obviously, we are very focused on issues such as artificial intelligence. The Committee on Innovation really has, as we view it, two responsibilities. One of them is to provide advice to the ASA on developing policies, on what information we need to provide to the members of the ASA to be prepared for the future. And the other part we think of is a role we can play possibly in helping to advance technology and innovation safely. And obviously, artificial intelligence crosses all of those concepts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that background. We also have Dr. Peter Killoran. Peter, thank you so much for joining us here on Top Med Talk. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a generalist anesthesiologist in a large academic medical center, and I do that actually as the smaller part of my my time these days. I'm also a chief informatics officer for the Memorial Hermann Healthcare System in Houston, Texas, and I have an academic appointment in their School of Biomedical Informatics as well as the medical school.
Wonderful. And you are also on the chair of an ASA committee, correct?
Yes, and I'm the chair of the Committee on Informatics and Information Technology. So we are engaged also on topics around artificial intelligence and also just more generally how technology impacts the practice.
There's a lot of talk about AI here at the meeting. I think, Peter, you said that you've heard it in almost every talk that you've been to. You may be, like you said, you may be a little biased.
I'm self-selecting for that, probably, a little biased sample.
Yeah. So just to kind of level set and see where we are here, what you're hearing, where do you feel like we are in this space right now with AI and where it's coming into play?
Well, I think the adoption of AI or the introduction into our practice is going to follow a similar pattern to other technologies that have come into our space. So there's a hype cycle that goes with that. It starts with a new innovation, and there's a lot of excitement about that. It grows very quickly to a peak where everyone has probably some unrealistic expectations about what it's going to do and what its impacts are going to be. Once we start to understand what some of those limitations are, the excitement declines. The trough of despair is what that's called.
It is the grief cycle, right?
And then you sort of work through that and really figure out how it fits best into the practice, and you achieve a plateau of kind of success afterwards. And that's where we want to get to. But I would expect that this is the same for artificial intelligence and anesthesiology right now. We have a lot of excitement I don't think we know necessarily where we are in the hype cycle right now. Are we still on the way up?
Yeah.
Have we peaked? We're certainly not in the trough of despair, I don't think.
No, not yet, I don't think.
But I also don't think we're anywhere near figuring out exactly how this is going to look when we get to that next plateau of productivity.
Yeah. Ron, did you want to comment on that?
Yes. So when we talk about AI, I think it's important to realize that we're not talking about a single technology. Artificial intelligence has been part of much of our technology now for decades. Every time we're using processed EEG in the operating room, that is a AI-driven technology. We have AI for very specific purposes, and then what we're often talking about is much more expanded AI. The generative AI, like you see in ChatGPT, is very, very different than much of the AI systems that we're talking about, which are much more sort of statistical, trying to predict, diagnose, categorize factors. And often people think about AI as being human level general intelligence. We are so far away from that right now that that is pure hype at this point in time. But as we think about this large spectrum of AI, we need to be fairly specific about which things, and so some of them are accepted, some we may never see, some may be 5-10 years away.
Yeah. So, Mike, did you have a comment?
Well, I think your comments are very interesting. I mean, we've all grown up with the words AI, not necessarily focusing on the detail of what that means, and it's often thought of, as you say, as heading for some kind of general intelligence. But it does feel like we've crossed something of a threshold, in the last few months with the large language models and generative AI. Do you think the rate of adoption as a technology is going to be faster than things we've seen before, or do you think it's going to follow the same pattern, but what will the speed be like?
I think there's a lot of excitement about ChatGPT. I think that really changed the tenor of the conversation. But I think it remains to be seen how quickly the pipeline can bring actually useful products into practice and how comfortable we're going to be using them, given that there's not a lot of evidence for their benefit. It takes time to prove that something's going to work. And I don't know how quickly we're going to adopt things without that proof.
Yeah. And I was going to make that point too. Surely, Ron, you've been hearing, we all know that's been coming down the pike, but it seems like things just got really accelerated in the last, 6 months to a year.
Yes. And a lot of that has been driven by the incredible increases in computer ability.
Yeah.
So that things that could not have been done as AI in the past now are possible. There's a large commercial rush to it, and I think that's some of what's driving the hype, of which much of it does not have any evidence yet that they're able to actually achieve it. And we'll, I think, in a little bit be talking about some of the real limitations of AI that will slow the adoption significantly.
Yeah. And I think that was where I was wanting to go with our conversation now, really talking about what are those limitations. And one of the things we have not touched upon at the meeting this year are the ethical concerns around AI. Because when we were, just chatting about it before, that is something that, it's all kind of swimming up there, but it is, potentially an issue. So what are you guys talking about on that?
So I think one of the major ethical concerns with it is what I would think of as inappropriate use, even if it's not recognized as inappropriate use. AI systems are trained very specifically on a data set. And we see all the time that very minor changes in applying it to something different than the data set, whether that's the patients or a different group of patients, the procedures we're talking about potentially using it are slightly different, that the standard way we treat may change from hospital to hospital. All of those things can result in really very major differences in what AI will decide to do. There are other real ethical concerns. A major one is privacy, that the data sets which AI is being trained on, we already know that the amount of detail in those data sets can result in being able to identify individual patients. AI in its application may also have privacy issues. And then finally, we worry about bias, that the data sets may have bias built into them. Our care as it exists right now has disparities in healthcare. those will in some ways be part of what AI learns.
Yeah. Peter, what about you? What are some of the things that you're hearing and within the committee talking about?
I think another point, I certainly agree with what Dr. Pearl's saying about the concerns about training data sets and making sure that they're representative and being inclusive.
Yeah.
But the key way to mitigate that a little bit is to has transparency. And so do people know what the training data set was? Do they know what patients it was tested on and validated with, to make sure that the patient that's sitting in front of them right now is a good fit for that and they can expect a reasonable performance from the model that comes out of it? So that's another kind of dimension.
It all feels
to
very
this.
Black box.
Right
now.
And I think one of the keys to adopting it safely is breaking down some of that black box so that you understand how it actually is working. Unfortunately, the technology doesn't lend itself necessarily to being able to document exactly how it arrived at whatever conclusion it got to, but we can get transparency about what was it trained on and how was it validated. And then I think the question that Dr. Pearl is also bringing up is the sort of generalizability concern from one hospital to the next. How do we go about implementing this? Is it safe to take it from one hospital system where it was trained and tested and then just apply it in another place without going through a similar training and testing process to make sure that it's actually going to perform the way you think it's going to?
Yeah, I would add it's even a bigger problem in generalizability than simply from one hospital to another. Within the hospital, your patients who are there for major surgery, that whole system may now apply to the ones who are there for ambulatory surgery.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, so when we talk about being a diverse data set, it's not just socioeconomic or social determinants of health. It's disease states. It's, whether you're in the ICU and coming for a procedure versus an ambulatory patient coming for the same procedure. Those may need different models.
Yeah, for sure.
And when you look at the literature right now, over 90% of AI models which have been developed, when they're tried in a different place, do not work. And I think the real power of AI is its ability to find patterns that are not obviously distinguishable for us, but those patterns may have real minor specificity to them that little changes make a big difference.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't really thought of it like that. Well, I think a big question is, as a day-to-day clinician in the OR working every day, how is this going to affect, what should we as day-to-day clinicians be thinking about and using AI and bringing it into practice? Again, there's a lot of concerns that people are talking about right now. So what are some of the things you guys are talking about on the committee?
I think Dr. Pearl already mentioned it's already here. I mean, there are tools that are available today that you're using that you may not even really realize.
So do you think people realize that?
Well, I'm not sure people, it's a spectrum, right? So
for sure.
What has changed is sort of the chat GPT, the level of sophistication. It's changing. It's becoming a lot more sophisticated and perhaps becoming a different thing. But this is not like suddenly all new. Yeah. We have been dependent on technology that's using these sort of machine learning techniques, maybe not as sophisticated as what's on the horizon or what's even really being talked about in this meeting today, but it's been here for a long time. So I don't think the approach necessarily needs to be that different as we look at more sophisticated tools. When you're looking at an EEG, you are critical of what kind of number you need to be critical of what number is coming out of it and whether you believe it. And I think that's got to be true for these new tools too. We need to maintain a critical attitude about the information we're getting off of these tools and not forget that our clinical judgment is still the most important piece here. It's just another piece of information coming at you that you can use to guide. Doesn't mean you have to follow it. Yeah,
it's a tool. I mean, that helps us do our job.
Yeah, I think it's, there are great things about AI when we talk about clinical practice. It's vigilant the entire time. It may see things we don't see.
Pick up on nuances that we may never know.
But important will be for the anesthesiologist to basically recognize it as a piece of information, and we have great experience of getting conflicting pieces of information already and trying to make a decision on that basis, and that's what we'll have to do with AI.
Distilling all the information, data points. Maybe this helps consolidate maybe some of those data points that we're having to filter out. But yeah, for sure. Mike, did you?
Yeah, I mean, Peter, you commented it's a very pervasive technology. Sometimes we don't actually realize we're dealing with it. And a lot of our conversation seems to have been implicitly about devices which have got AI built into them in their validation sets, etc. But there's a more general application, and ChatGPT being a great example, whereby, forgive me stereotyping, but the young in particular who are rapid adopters are using these interfaces as a means of accessing all sorts of different resources. So you can imagine someone just, asking whichever app it was. There are other apps are available, but asking, what the best drug dose for this, or what, which is out with medical technology specifically, but could become very common. Is that something that falls under your remit, or something you've been considering?
Yeah, I think there are more general tools, AI tools that are being developed for physicians, not just anesthesiologists, that we don't want to forget about in this. One of them is the ability of tools like ChatGPT or generative AI to summarize information. Yeah. So if we can figure out how to summarize a patient's chart to bring forward key pieces of information that are relevant to an anesthesiologist, that could be really powerful in changing the way we take care of that individual patient. And the details of that are hidden in that chart, buried. If we're often in very time-constrained environments where we don't really have time to read through 100 pages of a patient's chart. We do our best to get what we can. Could a summative tool do that as well or better and bring information forward? I think that's a huge potential for us. And then also offloading other kinds of administrative tasks is a real area of opportunity.
Yeah, that we don't often think about. Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to add a comment about ChatGPT. Because it is so good at language, people tend to accept it as understanding what it is saying. It does not understand, and Correct. So some of the time it literally makes up data or says things which are just completely wrong. And it's a good example of, it can be very useful, but people will have to always be vigilant about what information you're actually getting out of AI.
And there are skills in using the technology, aren't there? Because you can go back to the one of these generative models and ask it for its train of thought. For example, you can interrogate to explore the validity of what the output is, but you've got to know to do that and how to do it.
Yeah, but if you ask it what its train of thought is, it's not actually a train of thought. It's a series. It's predicting based on the last set of words. What's the next most likely word to come? That's how they kind of work. So it's not actually able to articulate a train of thought in the way we think of it as a human. It's a different task.
But it can at least be helpful because it gives you, if there's a logical non sequitur in there,
Well, one of the more interesting things I've seen is when you ask GPT to critique its own response, and it will be able to find some of the deficiencies where it's like, oh, actually, I made that up in my previous iteration. It can do those sorts of things, which is a really interesting direction for sort of developing the ability to self-critique. I don't know where we are in adding those back into these models, but I suppose that's a potential future state.
For sure. So we've talked about limitations, ethical concerns. I think one of the big topics is just ultimately patient safety. And how do we use this technology? And I think, Ron, you kind of touched on it earlier, that, depending on what the algorithms are based upon and all those can affect, what the actual, what our plan of action is or care is based on that. And that may not be the best thing for our patients.
I think the general approach nowadays has been moving in these applications from the term artificial intelligence to augmented intelligence. This is giving us information that we don't simply go ahead and take as being true and act on. We're still going to have to be physicians. We're going to be thinking about our patient, and we may have information that the system does not have. For example, right now in the operating room, they may not know what the surgeon just did. There may be large blood loss that we can see. Things like that. Yep. But also, we'll see responses. We'll have a lot of information, and we'll also know a lot about the patient. And in many ways, AI is a form of pattern recognition. We're already superb at pattern recognition, and we don't want to give that up. So I don't see AI as a threat to patient safety. It's like many of the things we do. It will help us provide better care for our patients, but we need to be recognizing the limitations of it.
Yeah. From an IT perspective and the committee that you've been working on, what are some of the patient safety concerns that have been brought up there? or have there been?
Well, I mean, I think it's more generally, what do you do when the model gets it wrong?
Yes.
So none of these are going to have 100%, not going to perform perfectly every time. So, I mean, that's been a big point of discussion for us as a group, is how do you talk about the liability that's associated with that? And, if this really does become, if we do really get great tools, is there going to be a liability for not adopting them? And that's another role for the ASA to think about, of whether or not if we do get really good tools, when do we say this should become a standard of care? Those kinds of factors.
Yeah. Well, I know the ASA, I mean, again, this has been a hot topic, and you've actually been asked on the committees to develop kind of a strategic plan for adoption and rollout, and just how we're thinking about artificial intelligence and some of these new technologies. Where are you guys at on that, and how is that going to be? How are you going to develop that over the committees?
I would say task number one is figuring out where we are, where in the hype cycle, what's real, what's likely to become real in the near future, and what's really far off fantasy and separating those two things. Yeah. If we can figure out how to get that right, it's a lot easier to develop a strategy around which of these things do we then go and promote, and which do we suggest that we pass on, and then navigating the whole landscape of regulation, for which there's not a whole lot, but there's discussion of in Washington about how AI should be regulated, and that figuring out a strategy for how do we work with industry on this, and make sure that anesthesiology has the attention of industry, and that our use cases are getting some attention and are on the development roadmap. That's another sort of source of advocacy. And then making sure that our members know how to use these tools safely and effectively.
Yeah. Ron, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes. So AI it's a platform technology. It has lots of applications, cuts across many things. So one thing that the ASA is being sure we do is that all the different stakeholders within ASA, the different committees, basically it affects preoperative, intraoperative, postoperative care. It affects potentially everything we do. So we're trying to be sure that we have all the different stakeholders involved. And then, as was mentioned, as we talked about government, et cetera, and industry, we are a stakeholder in a larger use of AI, and that we are collaborating to be sure that what comes out of this will be valuable and safe.
Yeah. So if ASA members are interested in finding out more information and furthering the conversations, what's the best way to get in contact? Is it reaching out to the committees, or are you guys producing a lot of content around this, or anticipating that you probably will be? Yeah.
So our Committee on Innovation will be coming out with work product on AI, but we're also, I think, trying to collaborate among committees so that we don't have lots of conflicting or separate information. I think people who are interested can contact both of our committees, and we'll try to get them good response. And we're trying to develop really a community within ASA of people who are interested in AI.
Yeah. Peter, what about you?
The approach to this needs to be broad and inclusive. So you hear it at this meeting, every committee, it seems like, is talking about this, and we really want to take advantage of that. That's great. There's not going to be one single place that knows the most about a particular use case and how AI could influence it. You have to be the domain expert in that area to really make that evaluation. So we have to balance that against the need to have a sort of unified approach and collaborative approach and not be working in silos. Stay tuned on how we actually propose to solve that. I don't
might ask AI about it.
I don't think we have the answer to that yet, but that is definitely something we're trying to work on. Having a central point where you can at least get ideas sorted and make sure you're directed to the correct area of expertise.
Yeah.
So more to come on that.
Where do you see this going in the next year to 2 years? Do you think we're going to change? The hype cycle is going to move a little bit that quickly, or what do you think, Dr. Pearl?
I don't think a lot's going to change in the next 1 or 2 years. When we talk about these things, we always kind of overestimate how fast something's going to change.
Yeah.
And there'll be more of what's going on right now. What we desperately need is evidence of validation that there's uses that go across the ways we want to use them. What I'm really unsure about is where we're going to be in 5 to 10 years, because the rate of expansion of AI, the different techniques people are using is advancing so fast that I find it very difficult to predict, will what's hyped today actually be standard care at that point in time.
Yeah, that's great. Gentlemen, thank you so much for a fascinating conversation. We could continue to talk, I think, for a while about this, but it's great to look out for and stay tuned for the products that you guys are going to be putting out and the information that's coming out. And, joining in the conversation, I think, is really important for the day-to-day clinicians, getting all of our concerns out there. But thanks for taking the time to sit down with us here at Top Med Talk.
Thank you.
And thanks for listening to Top Med Talk. Again, you can always find all of these awesome conversations at topmedtalk.com. We're on social, X, LinkedIn, Facebook. We are there. YouTube, our videos will be out, and you'll be able to see the content from Anesthesiology 2023 there. So thanks so much for listening. Cheers, everybody.
Top Med Talk. Thanks for downloading Top Med Talk. Don't forget to subscribe via your podcatcher. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And also, don't forget, Top Med Talk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that. If you check out ebpom.org, you can find low prices on some of the conferences we're organising around the world. Many of them are virtual and don't even involve you leaving your own home. Check out ebpom.org now.